The crystalline spires of Nexus Prime stretched toward the void, their surfaces reflecting the light of a dozen distant stars. Within the most prestigious chamber of the Galactic Council, the Ambassador Quelix adjusted his chitinous carapace and tapped his 4 primary limbs against the polished obsidian table. The rhythmic clicking echoed through the vast hall, a nervous habit that had served him well during 3 centuries of diplomatic service. Order, order, High Counselor Vrax's voice resonated through the chamber like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The ancient Zephyrian floated above his designated seat, his translucent form shimmering with an ethereal glow that spoke of millennia spent in contemplation. We gather today to welcome our newest member species to the Galactic Union. Quelix's compound eyes focused on the human sitting across from him. Captain Marcus Thompson, or Tank as his identification badge cheerfully proclaimed, looked remarkably unremarkable. Medium height, brown hair, wearing what appeared to be a simple military uniform. Nothing about him suggested the legendary ferocity that had earned his species the designation Deathworlder. Captain Thompson, Vrax continued, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic authority, we must complete the standard integration protocols. This includes a comprehensive review of your species' military history. Tank leaned back in his chair, a casual gesture that somehow made several council members shift uncomfortably. Sure thing, Counselor. What would you like to know? Quelix consulted his datapad, mandibles clicking softly as he read. Standard procedure requires documentation of your species' most recent military conflicts. We understand that primitive species often engage in territorial disputes during their development phases. Recent conflicts? Tank's eyebrows rose slightly. Well, that's going to be a long list. The chamber fell silent. Vrax's luminescent form flickered with what might have been confusion. Perhaps we should clarify the time frame. Within the last, shall we say, 50 of your Earth years? Tank scratched his chin thoughtfully. 50 years? Let me think. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Somalia, various peacekeeping operations, counter-terrorism stuff, drug wars, cyber conflicts. He paused, counting on his fingers. Oh, and the space pirates near the Centauri route. That was fun. Quelix's mandibles stopped clicking entirely. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Several council members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their growing discomfort. Forgive me, Captain. Vrax's voice had lost some of its cosmic serenity. Did you say space pirates? As in active combat? Recently? Last Tuesday, actually, Tank replied with the same tone one might use to discuss the weather. Pretty standard patrol duty. They surrendered after we disabled their engines. Good thing, too, paperwork for prisoner processing is a nightmare. The Thuvian representative, a massive creature whose species prided itself on ancient warrior traditions, made a strangled sound that might have been a whimper. But surely, Quelix's voice rose an octave. These are isolated incidents? Remnants of your species' barbaric past? Tank's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. Barbaric? Nah, we're pretty civilized about it these days. The rules of engagement, Geneva Conventions, proper uniform regulations, very professional. Professional, Vrax repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. You approach warfare professionally? Well, yeah. It's not like we're animals about it, Tank shrugged. We've got standards. The chamber erupted in nervous chittering, harmonious humming, and what sounded distinctly like someone hyperventilating through multiple respiratory systems. This was not going according to the standard integration protocol. Perhaps, Vrax said, his ethereal form flickering with what could only be described as diplomatic panic, we should call in additional expertise. He gestured toward the chamber's secondary entrance. Dr. Foster, Security Chief Blorg, please join us. Dr. Liana Foster entered first, her confident stride and warm smile immediately putting the council at ease. Behind her lumbered Security Chief Blorg, all 3 meters of him, his chitinous armor plates gleaming under the chamber's lights. The Thuvian's reputation as a fierce warrior had preceded him, stories of his species' legendary combat prowess whispered in reverent tones throughout the galaxy. Ah, excellent, Quellix's mandibles resumed their nervous clicking. Dr. Foster, as Earth's appointed historian, perhaps you could clarify the extent of humanity's war period. Dr. Foster took her seat beside Tank, pulling out a sleek datapad. War period? Could you be more specific? The period during which your species engaged in organized military conflict, Vrax explained patiently. We understand that developing civilizations often experience a brief phase of territorial expansion before achieving enlightenment. Tank and Dr. Foster exchanged a look that somehow managed to be both amused and apologetic. Which war? Tank asked, his tone suggesting genuine confusion. This century, or are we going back further? The chamber fell silent again. Blorg's massive form seemed to deflate slightly, his warrior confidence wavering like a candle in a storm. This century. Quellix's voice had risen to a pitch that suggested his species' equivalent of hysteria. You mean the current 100-year period? Well, yeah, Tank nodded. I mean, if you want the full list, we've got World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War, Gulf War, Afghanistan, Iraq, the War on Terror, various African conflicts, the drug wars, cyber wars, the Great Meme War of 2087. He paused, counting on his fingers again. Oh, and the really nasty one with the Mars colonies. That was brutal. The Mars colonies, Rax repeated faintly. You fought yourselves on another planet? Multiple planets, actually, Dr. Foster added helpfully. The lunar independence movement got pretty heated. And don't get me started on the Jupiter Mining Consortium incident. Blorg made a sound that his species had never made before, a sort of whimpering rumble that vibrated through the floor. The legendary Thuvian warrior was beginning to look distinctly green around his mandibles. But surely, Quellix's voice cracked slightly, these are exceptions. Anomalies in your otherwise peaceful development? Tank tilted his head, considering. Peaceful? I mean, we try to keep the civilian casualties down, but peaceful. He laughed, a sound that made several council members flinch. We've been fighting somebody somewhere pretty much constantly for the last 5,000 years. 5,000 Vrax's form flickered so violently that the chamber's lighting systems automatically adjusted to compensate. Give or take, Dr. Foster added cheerfully. The record-keeping gets a bit fuzzy around the Bronze Age, but we've definitely maintained a consistent level of armed conflict throughout recorded history. Consistent? Blorg whispered, his massive frame trembling. You mean continuous? Well, yeah, Tank shrugged. Peace is nice and all, but it never lasts long. Someone's always got a problem with someone else. Territory, resources, ideology, religion, economic systems. Who makes the better pizza? He waved his hand dismissively. You know how it is. The council members stared at him in horror. They very much did not know how it was. Pizza? Quellix managed to croak. Great war, that one, Tank nodded sagely. Chicago versus New York. Still ongoing, technically. Very passionate combatants. Blorg, the supposedly fierce warrior whose species had fought exactly 3 wars in their entire 10,000-year history, slowly slid down in his chair until only his eyes were visible above the table. His reputation for ferocity was rapidly being overshadowed by his growing resemblance to a traumatized child. I think, Dr. Foster said gently, noting the council's collective mental breakdown, we might need to adjust our presentation approach. Dr. Foster activated her datapad, and a holographic display materialized above the council table. The 3-dimensional timeline stretched across the chamber like a glowing snake, pulsing with red markers that seemed to multiply before their eyes. Perhaps a more systematic approach would be helpful, she said in the soothing tone academics used when delivering particularly devastating information. Let me call in our military historian for additional context. The air shimmered, and Admiral Zara Blackwood's hologram materialized beside the table. Even as a projection, her presence commanded attention. The Admiral's dress uniform was immaculate, her bearing perfect, and her smile carried the kind of confidence that came from decades of successful military campaigns. Admiral Blackwood. Dr. Foster nodded professionally. Could you walk the Council through humanity's military timeline? Start with the ancient period. Certainly, Doctor, the Admiral's voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Beginning with recorded history, we have the Mesopotamian conflicts, roughly 3,500 BCE. The Sumerians were quite innovative with their warfare techniques. Surely you mean 3,500 years ago? Quelix interrupted, his mandibles clicking frantically as he performed calculations on his own datapad. No, 3,500 before Common Era, Admiral Blackwood corrected politely. That's approximately 6,500 years ago by current reckoning. Quelix's datapad sparked. Actual sparks. The device had apparently given up trying to process the numbers. Moving chronologically, the Admiral continued with the same pleasant tone. We have the Egyptian dynasties, with their various conquests and internal conflicts. The Assyrian Empire was particularly effective at siege warfare. The Persian Wars, of course, were legendary for their scale. Decades, Vrax whispered, his ethereal form flickering like a dying star. Surely you mean decades of conflict, not centuries. Oh no, definitely centuries, Dr. Foster confirmed cheerfully. The 100 Years' War, for instance, lasted from 1337 to 1453. Though technically it was 116 years, so really more of a 116 years war, but that doesn't have the same ring to it. Blorg had completely disappeared behind his datapad, only the occasional whimper indicating he was still conscious. The fascinating thing, Admiral Blackwood continued, is how humans developed parallel technologies. While the Greeks were perfecting phalanx formations, the Chinese were inventing gunpowder, independently, of course. Different continents, different approaches to the same fundamental problem. What problem? Vrax asked weakly. How to kill the other guy more efficiently, tanks supplied helpfully. The medieval period shows remarkable innovation. Dr. Foster picked up the thread. Castles, siege engines, crossbows, longbows, early firearms, each advancement spurring counter-advancements. It's really quite elegant from an evolutionary perspective. Elegant, Quelix repeated, his voice hollow. His calculations had apparently broken his mind along with his datapad. Oh, and we should mention the religious wars, Admiral Blackwood added. The Crusades, the 30 Years' War, the various inquisitions. Humans have always been remarkably creative at finding reasons to fight. But surely Vrax's form was now flickering so rapidly he resembled a strobe light. Surely these conflicts prevented your species from developing. From building civilizations? Dr. Foster and Admiral Blackwood exchanged the kind of look that teachers shared when students asked particularly naive questions. Actually, quite the opposite, Dr. Foster explained. The Roman Empire was built through conquest. The Mongol Empire facilitated trade routes. The age of exploration was driven by competition between European powers. War has been one of our primary drivers of technological and social advancement. You built empires while fighting? Quelix managed to croak. We built empires by fighting, Tank corrected. Big difference. The Industrial Revolution is particularly interesting, Admiral Blackwood continued, apparently oblivious to the mounting horror in the chamber. Steam power, railways, telegraph systems, mass production, all accelerated by military necessity. The American Civil War alone produced innovations in communication, transportation, and manufacturing that transformed the entire planet. While fighting a war, Vrax whispered. Oh, several wars, Dr. Foster noted. The Napoleonic Wars were happening in Europe, various colonial conflicts worldwide. The Crimean War introduced modern medical practices. Wait, Quelix's voice cracked. Medical practices? You advanced medicine during warfare? Florence Nightingale revolutionized nursing during the Crimean War, Admiral Blackwood nodded. Antiseptic practices, triage systems, battlefield surgery. Some of our greatest humanitarian advances came from treating war casualties. The silence that followed was pregnant with existential dread. Let me understand this correctly, Vrax said slowly. Your species fights continuous wars, builds civilizations during these wars, advances technology because of these wars. and develops compassionate medical practices to treat the victims of these wars? That's a pretty accurate summary, Dr. Foster confirmed brightly. And this has been going on for 6,000 years? Quelix asked. Recorded history, yes, Admiral Blackwood nodded. Probably longer, but the archaeological record gets spotty. Blorg's whimpering had evolved into what sounded like a lullaby. The legendary warrior was apparently singing himself to sleep to escape the horror. So when you say recent conflicts, Vrax continued with the determination of someone approaching a mental cliff. You mean the most recent conflicts in an unbroken chain of warfare spanning millennia? Now you're getting it, Tank grinned. The silence stretched until Quelix's nervous system apparently rebooted itself. His mandibles began clicking again, but this time with the sharp staccato of determination rather than anxiety. This is impossible, he declared, rising from his seat. No species could maintain such a level of conflict and still achieve spaceflight. We demand proof. Proof? Tank raised an eyebrow. What kind of proof? Combat demonstration, Blorg mumbled from behind his datapad. Show us these legendary human fighting techniques. Dr. Foster winced. I'm not sure that's such a good idea. Nonsense, Vrax's form solidified with newfound resolve. If humans are truly as formidable as claimed, let them demonstrate. We shall adjourn to the station's training facility. 20 minutes later, the entire council stood in the observation deck of Nexus Prime's Combat Training Center. The facility was a marvel of engineering, capable of simulating any environment from Arctic tundra to molten lava fields. Currently, it displayed a standard urban warfare scenario, complete with buildings, obstacles, and defensive positions. I've called in our demonstration team, Tank announced, gesturing toward the airlock. Colonel Jake Martinez, Special Forces. Lieutenant Amy Chen Park, Combat Engineer. Colonel Martinez entered first, his casual swagger somehow more intimidating than any formal military bearing. His uniform was practical, rather than ceremonial, marked with the kind of wear that spoke of actual use. Lieutenant Chen Park followed, her slight frame contrasting sharply with the colonel's imposing presence, but her eyes held the same calm confidence. Reaper Amy, Tank nodded. The Council wants to see what humans can do in combat. Standard demonstration? Colonel Martinez asked, his voice carrying the lazy drawl of someone utterly unimpressed by the situation. Make it interesting, Tank replied. The aliens watched as both humans entered the simulation chamber. The scenario activated, projecting holographic enemies throughout the urban landscape. Standard protocol called for careful advancement, coordinated fire, and methodical clearing of each position. Colonel Martinez immediately broke every rule of engagement the aliens knew. Amy, I'm going through the front door, he announced, charging directly toward the largest enemy concentration. Can you make me a back exit? Give me 30 seconds, Lieutenant Chen Park replied, disappearing around a corner with movements that were somehow both graceful and predatory. What are they doing? Quelix whispered. This violates all tactical doctrine. Just watch, Tank said, settling into his commentary role. And here we see the classic human approach to overwhelming odds. Instead of the sensible retreat, Martinez has chosen the time-honored tradition of running directly at the problem. The colonel dove through a window, rolled, and came up firing. His movements were fluid, almost dance-like, as he weaved between enemy fire while systematically eliminating targets. What should have been a suicidal charge became a masterclass in controlled chaos. Impossible, Blorg breathed. No warrior could survive that level of exposure. Oh, but wait, Tank continued in his announcer voice. Here comes Chen Park with the technical solution. The building exploded. Not dramatically, but with the precise, controlled demolition of someone who understood exactly how much explosive to use and where to place it. The enemy positions collapsed in a cascade of debris, creating new cover while eliminating threats. Structural engineering meets combat engineering, Dr. Foster noted approvingly. Amy always did have an artistic touch with demolitions. They destroyed the battlefield, Vrax observed weakly. That's not tactics, that's vandalism. That's adaptation, Tank corrected. The environment doesn't suit you? Change the environment. The simulation reset, this time presenting an open field with entrenched positions. Standard doctrine called for careful flanking maneuvers or artillery support. The humans conferred briefly, then split up. Colonel Martinez began what appeared to be a frontal assault, drawing enemy fire while moving in an erratic pattern that somehow kept him just ahead of the targeting systems. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Chen Park had vanished entirely. "Where did she go?" Quelix demanded. "Underground," Tank replied cheerfully. "Amy's specialty is making her own routes. She's probably tunneling under their positions right now." "Tunneling? During combat?" Vrax's ethereal form flickered with disbelief. "Multidimensional thinking," Dr. Foster explained. "If you can't go through, around, or over, you go under, or sometimes above. Amy once dropped through a skylight during a hostage rescue. The enemy positions began exploding from below, precise charges that eliminated defensive positions while leaving escape routes intact. Colonel Martinez immediately capitalized, advancing through the chaos with the kind of timing that spoke of years of partnership. They're treating this like a puzzle, Quelix realized. Not a battle, but a problem to be solved. Bingo, Tank grinned. War is just applied problem solving with higher stakes. The simulation ended with both humans standing in the ruins of what had been an impregnable defensive position. They weren't even breathing hard. "Standard demonstration complete," Colonel Martinez reported. "Want us to run the nightmare scenario?" "Nightmare scenario?" Blorg whispered. "Better not," Tank decided. "I think they've seen enough for now." As the humans exited the chamber, the aliens remained frozen in stunned silence. They had witnessed something that challenged every assumption they held about combat tactics and the nature of warfare itself. "Questions?" Tank asked brightly. Nobody answered. Nobody could. Back in the council chambers, the atmosphere had shifted from diplomatic formality to something resembling a support group for traumatized aliens. Quelix sat slumped in his chair, his compound eyes staring at nothing. Vrax's ethereal form flickered weakly, like a dying light bulb. Blorg had given up all pretense of dignity and was openly sucking his thumb, if the appendage protruding from his mandibles could be called a thumb. "I need to understand," Quelix said finally, his voice hollow. "Why? Why do you fight constantly? What drives this endless cycle of violence?" Tank settled back in his chair, considering the question with the same casual attention he might give to a crossword puzzle. "You know what your problem is. You think war is the opposite of peace. It isn't." Vrax managed to whisper. "For us? Nah. War's not the opposite of peace for us. It's Tuesday." The silence that followed was so profound that the chamber's life support systems seemed unnaturally loud. "Tuesday," Blorg repeated slowly, as if the word might make more sense if he said it carefully. "Look at it this way," Tank continued, warming to his theme. "You guys see conflict as this big, dramatic thing. The end of peace, the breakdown of civilization, the failure of diplomacy. For humans, it's just another thing that happens, like weather. Sometimes it rains, sometimes there's war. You pack an umbrella for one, body armor for the other?" Dr. Foster leaned forward, her academic instincts kicking in. "From an evolutionary psychology perspective, it makes perfect sense. Humans evolved as persistence hunters and tribal competitors. Conflict resolution through violence is as natural to us as breathing. We've simply scaled it up from individual combat to global warfare." "But the scale," Quelix protested weakly. "The sheer scope of destruction is proportional to our capabilities," Dr. Foster nodded. Stone tools meant small-scale tribal warfare. Nuclear weapons meant the possibility of species extinction. We've always fought with whatever we had available. "My species," Vrax said slowly, "fought our first war 4,000 years ago. It lasted 6 days. We called it the Great Suffering." 6 days? Tank's eyebrows rose. "That's barely a skirmish. What was your second war?" We haven't had a second war yet. The great suffering was so traumatic that we dedicated our entire civilization to preventing its recurrence. Ha. Tank looked genuinely puzzled. So what do you do when someone takes your stuff? Takes our stuff? Vrax's form flickered with confusion. Why would anyone take our possessions? Because they want them, and you have them, Tank explained patiently. Basic resource competition. You've seriously never had anyone try to steal your territory? Your technology? Your lunch money? We share resources equitably, Quelix said, his voice gaining strength. The Mantari fought 2 wars in our entire history. The territorial dispute of 2847 lasted 3 days. We still hold memorial services. 3 days, Tank mused. Was that including weekends? Weekends? Blorg looked up from his thumb sucking. What are weekends? Never mind, Tank waved dismissively. The point is, 3 days isn't a war. That's barely a heated argument with weapons. But people died, Quelix protested. 17 beings lost their lives. We erected monuments. We teach our children about the horror. 17? Tank's expression shifted to something approaching sympathy. That's really sweet, actually. We call that a light casualties day. Light casualties, Vrax repeated faintly. Our civil war killed 620,000 people, Dr. Foster added helpfully. And that was just Americans fighting Americans on one continent. In the 1860s. But why continue? Blorg asked, his voice small. Why not learn from the horror and stop? Tank considered this seriously. Because someone else is always willing to fight. If you're not prepared to defend yourself, you become someone else's property. And humans really don't like being property. So you fight to prevent being conquered? Quelix asked hopefully. Sometimes. Other times we fight because we're bored, or because someone insulted our sports team, or because we want their stuff. Tank shrugged. Humans are remarkably flexible in their justifications for violence. This is insane, Vrax declared. Your entire species is collectively insane. Probably, Tank agreed cheerfully. But we're functional insane. We built spaceships, cured diseases, created art, explored the universe, all while fighting each other constantly. That's what makes it so terrifying, Quelix whispered. The chamber fell into a contemplative silence, broken only by the soft humming of life support systems and Blorg's occasional sniffles. It was Vrax who finally gathered enough courage to ask the question that had been building throughout their entire conversation. Captain Thompson, the ancient Zephyrian's voice carried the weight of cosmic dread, I must ask you directly. How long has Earth been at war? Tank paused, his hand moving instinctively to check his wrist chronometer. The gesture was so casual, so automatic, that it took several seconds for its implications to sink in. Then he looked up with that same easy smile that had been unsettling the council all day. What time is it? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. What do you mean? Quelix asked, though his tone suggested he really didn't want to know. Well, it's currently 1,347 hours Galactic Standard Time, Tank explained patiently. Which means it's about 0947 in the eastern United States, 1647 in Central Europe, and 2247 in the Pacific Theater. So let me think, he tilted his head, as if consulting some internal database. Eastern Europe's got some low-intensity conflicts running. There's active peacekeeping operations in 3 African sectors. The South China Sea situation is still technically active. We've got anti-piracy patrols running near the shipping lanes, border skirmishes in Central Asia, counter-terrorism operations on 4 continents. He paused, counting on his fingers. Oh, and there's that thing with the asteroid miners near Ceres. They're being a bit difficult about contract negotiations. You mean, Vrax's voice was barely audible right now, at this very moment? Sure, Tank nodded. We're always at war somewhere, time zones, you know. While it's peaceful morning in New York, it's active combat evening in the Pacific. The sun never sets on human warfare. Quellix's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. His compound eyes stared at Tank with the fixed intensity of someone watching their worldview collapse in real time. Always. You're always at war. Pretty much, Tank confirmed cheerfully. I mean, we might have a few minutes between conflicts occasionally, but that's usually just reload time. Dr. Foster pulled out her datapad and began tapping through screens. Actually, our current analysis suggests that there hasn't been a single moment in recorded human history where our species wasn't engaged in active combat somewhere on the planet. But we're off it, now that we've expanded to space. Not one moment, Quellix repeated mechanically. His neural processors were clearly struggling to accommodate this information. 6,000 years of continuous warfare. Give or take, Tank shrugged. Like I said, record keeping gets fuzzy in the early periods. Quellix suddenly lurched toward his broken datapad, frantically attempting to restart its systems. The Galactic Peace Index, he muttered desperately. I have to recalculate the entire Galactic Peace Index. If humans score negative infinity on warfare metrics, negative infinity might be optimistic, Dr. Foster observed mildly. Blorg had progressed from thumb-sucking to what appeared to be a full catatonic state. The legendary Thuvian warrior was now humming a lullaby while rocking gently back and forth. But surely Vrax made one last desperate attempt at rationality. Surely there are peaceful periods in your history? Moments of tranquility we could study? Tank considered this seriously. You want to see the peaceful bits? I mean, there was that Christmas truce in 1914, but that only lasted a day. And both sides went right back to shooting each other afterward. One day, Vrax whispered. Well, technically it was just Christmas Day, so really more like 12 hours in some sectors, Tank clarified helpfully. 12 hours of peace in 6,000 years. Quellix's voice had taken on the mechanical quality of a malfunctioning translation device. Hey, we're not monsters, Tank protested mildly. We take breaks for holidays, meal times, weather delays. We're very civilized about our scheduling. The profound silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Vrax's ethereal form finally giving up and flickering out of existence entirely. The ancient Zephyrian had apparently decided that unconsciousness was preferable to continued awareness of reality. So, Tank said into the silence, his tone bright with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoyed educational moments. Any other questions about human military history? Nobody answered. Nobody was capable of answering. They had asked how long Earth had been at war, and discovered that the question itself was meaningless. For humans, war wasn't a temporary state to be ended. It was simply the natural order of existence. An hour later, the council chambers had been cleared of all human presence. Emergency medical teams had revived Vrax, whose ethereal form now flickered weakly like a candle in a hurricane. Blorg sat upright but still occasionally made soft whimpering sounds. Quellix had managed to restart his datapad, though it now displayed only error messages and what appeared to be crying emoji. Motion to address, Vrax announced weakly, his voice carrying none of its former cosmic authority. I propose we reclassify humanity from emerging spacefaring species to weapons of mass destruction. Seconded, Quellix replied immediately. No, wait. Thirded. I'm seconding and thirding my own motion. Can we do that? Blorg asked, his voice small and uncertain. The rules of parliamentary procedure seem inadequate for our current situation, Vrax admitted. I don't think the founding members anticipated having to categorize an entire species as an existential threat to galactic peace. My people have a saying, Blorg continued, his massive frame somehow appearing fragile. We are warriors born of storm and starfire, forged in the crucible of eternal conflict. He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. I think we've been doing cosplay this whole time. Your species fought 2 wars, Quellix pointed out gently. 2 wars in 10,000 years, Blorg corrected. They called it their great conflict of the ages. It lasted 72 hours and the casualties were in the hundreds. We built monuments. We have a national day of mourning. We teach our children about the horror of warfare. He laughed, a sound that bordered on hysteria. The humans call that a light Tuesday. What do we do? Vrax asked the question that had been haunting all of them. How do we handle a species that treats apocalyptic warfare as background noise? We give them whatever they want, Quelix said firmly. Full membership, trade agreements, territorial concessions, our firstborn offspring. Whatever keeps them happy and pointed away from us. Motion carried, Vrax agreed quickly, all in favor of appeasing the terrifying murder apes. 3 appendages of various descriptions shot into the air with desperate enthusiasm. It's unanimous then, Quelix declared. Humanity gets everything they ask for, plus anything they might ask for in the future, plus some things they haven't thought to ask for yet. Outside the council chambers, Tank strolled casually toward the transport bay, Dr. Foster walking beside him. Their conversation drifted through the corridor, audible through the chamber's partially open doors. So how do you think that went? Dr. Foster asked. Pretty well, Tank replied cheerfully. Though I'm kinda disappointed we didn't get to the really interesting stuff. Like what? What? Well, we never talked about the fun wars. You know, the Emu War, the War of Jenkins' Ear, the Great Molasses Flood of 1919. Those always get the best reactions. Their voices faded as they moved down the corridor, leaving behind 3 alien council members who were seriously reconsidering their life choices. Did he just say Emu War? Quelix whispered. I don't want to know, Vrax replied firmly. I really don't want to know. But somehow they all knew they would end up asking eventually. After all, curiosity was supposedly what killed the cat. And if humans were involved, the cat had probably been armed.